Welcome to Workplace Justice. From injuries to compensation, our experts have you covered.
Welcome to Workplace Justice with Randy Estes. I'm Sam Henniger. I'm excited to chat with Randy today because I was just having a conversation with his law partner, Dan Davis. But Randy, I want to get to know you better. I know you spent some time as an electrical engineer, but decided to not do engineering and instead go to law school. So please help us understand what your journey has been into practicing law.
That's true. I didn't actually practice as an electrical engineer, but I did get an electrical engineering degree, and I worked 2 summers at a chemical plant here in Baton Rouge. And those 2 summers were more than sufficient to convince me that isn't what I wanted to do. I often tell people a lot of it was you had to get there at 6:30 in the morning, a lot of working outside, and engineering is totally radically different than being a lawyer. A lot less people interaction. I much prefer that. And after 2 summers, I decided, hey, this isn't for me at all. My dad was also a chemical engineer, so I was working at his plants. It seemed like a natural progression just to do that. And then at the end, I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to try something else. I'm going to take the LSAT, and if I do well, I'll go to LSU Law School, and if I don't, I'll go do something else. I guess I'll go back to electrical engineering. I did, and so I went to law school. That's how I ended up there.
Well, that's interesting to hear about your dad's profession and how you sort of try to follow that line. But what was it that made you choose law, of all things? In
high school, I had this one teacher and took this class instead of the normal civics class. When I was in high school, it was called You and the Law, and loved the teacher. I guess in the back of my mind, I always thought maybe I could be a lawyer, but I put it off to be an engineer, never thought about it again until working, like I said, a couple of summers. And I thought, this isn't something that I want to do. I don't want to be an engineer for the rest of my life. I don't want to work at one of these chemical plants for sure. And I don't want to get somewhere and have to work at 6:30 in the morning. That's just not me.
Some of the key differences between Louisiana's workers' compensation system and, this is a mouthful here, but I'm reading the Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act, which is not a state system, but a federal system. Could you explain those differences?
Funny to say, there are a bunch of similarities and a bunch of differences. In Louisiana, it doesn't model, some states do, it doesn't model we call it the Longshore Act, basically, to shorten it up. Ours doesn't really model the Longshore Act. Some places do. Here are some of the key differences. All places have a cap on the weekly indemnity benefits that you can get. Louisiana's cap right now, let's say, is $816 a week. No matter how much you make. You could make $250,000 a year. You normally get 2/3 of whatever you were making, and that's true even for those high wage earners. But the max you can get in Louisiana, if you happen to be a high wage earner and you're injured and can't work, is $816. It goes up every year. It's adjusted each year. But so is the Longshore Act. That cap right now is a little above $1,800 a week. So if you're a high wage earner, which most of the people that are covered by the Longshore Act are high wage earners, you benefit tremendously from being under that system because you're going to get something much closer to what you were making as opposed to the roughly $800 weekly cap in the Louisiana system. That is probably the thing that most people notice about their case. The end of the case too, but while the case is going on, that's the biggest difference. The right to choose your own doctor, see your doctors, get the type of medical care that you want to get. There still can be fights about it for sure, just like in the Louisiana system. That's very similar. I find and most individuals who would experience both systems would find that the medical part of the system is very similar. A lot of the things that are behind the scenes that the clients don't see are different. Louisiana, this isn't true for every state, but you physically have to go file things at the court. In the Longshore system, they have what's called a C portal. You file everything online. It's an electronic filing. It's like a federal court system, the same thing. You file everything online there. You don't do that in Louisiana, really in any of our systems, but certainly not in the workers' comp system. I'd say on a surface level, those are the biggest things. The end of when the case goes to settle or the case is done, let's say someone goes back to work or they can't go back to work and they reach maximum medical improvement, whatever that is, and they're left, let's say, best example is they're left with a disability of some type. Under the federal system, a doctor assigns a disability rating to you, and you can argue about that, but that's what happens, and you get paid out a certain, generally, this isn't always true, but you get paid out a certain amount based on that disability rating. That's not true in Louisiana. It doesn't matter. They give you disability ratings, but they really don't have anything to do with settling your case. That has more to do with how many weeks of benefits you have left, how much medical treatment you have in the future. The settling part of each system is radically different. In Louisiana, when you go to settle, this is where the clients really notice it. We get paid usually a percentage. It's like a Corvette case, but it's capped out at 20% of what we can get of any settlement. In the Longshore case, that's not true. The attorney fees don't come out of the settlement. They're paid for by the defense, and you have to keep track of your time. It's based on an hourly rate. They kind of have to agree to it, or the judge has to sign off on it. But that one, in some ways, benefits the clients because they don't pay any of it. So that's probably the major differences between the two systems.
And so from that description, it's sounding to me like getting a case through to have the benefits from the Longshore Act seem altogether preferable to workers' comp. So maybe you could help us understand who even gets to file under the Longshore Act and what the differences might be on what you could raise a case for.
There's no easy answer to that. And for example, what I'll tell you is the Longshore Act doesn't prohibit you from making a state comp claim, like in Louisiana or other states. It gives each state the option to say, look, we want concurrent jurisdiction, meaning that you could choose which type of claim you want to make. Now, Louisiana, Mississippi too, has opted out of that. So if you fall under the Longshore Act, you cannot make a Louisiana workers' comp claim. Under Louisiana law, it doesn't have to be that way, but that's the way it is. Normally, people who do it are, people who are welders. There's classes of people under there who are welders working on barges, let's say, in navigable waterways. People who work on barges but aren't welders. I mean, that's a normal type. You can actually even work on land if it's assisting something on a ship or a barge. You can also be classified under the Longshore Act. So there's lots of people who can fall under it. In Louisiana, if you had the choice, it would be great, but you don't have the choice. And it is usually better, but not always. If you're a lower wage earner, it's probably better to fall under the Louisiana Workers' Compensation Act. You don't get that choice in Louisiana. Some states you do, this just isn't one of those states.
Randy, I'm interested to know what types of injuries or occupational illnesses are typically covered under workers' comp, and how does that compare to the scope of coverage under the Longshore Act?
All right, this is a question a lot of people ask us when they come in, and they're basically the same. At least from our type of practice, we get a lot of the same type of injuries, given the people we represent are usually some type of laborer, whether skilled or not. And so any workplace accident, is covered under Louisiana Workers' Comp and the Longshore Act. Now, there's some types of illnesses, and this is true for Louisiana as well, that are more difficult to prove. Like if you have a heart attack at work, you probably aren't covered unless you're doing something at work that either your work is very physically strenuous, or you happen to be doing something, moving some heavy piece of furniture that you normally don't do, and you have a heart attack. And the doctor can then say, yeah, I think that activity precipitated it. Then you might be covered. But almost everything is covered other than odd things that can happen to you, like heart attacks or strokes, things that can happen to you anywhere. And just for the fact that it happens to happen at work doesn't make it a workplace injury. But sometimes it is. It kind of depends on your job and what you do. That's probably the best example of things that aren't necessarily covered. But otherwise, they're the same typical injuries for Louisiana as longshore cases. I'd say almost identical, really. Not much difference at all.
We had gotten to hit on this a little bit before, but I'm wondering if you could answer for us, who is it? What type of industries, what type of work is typically covered under the Longshore Act? I'm assuming it just has a lot to do with being around the water, something like that, as opposed to workers' comp.
And boats and barges. And, dock workers who load stuff onto barges. And you don't even have to work necessarily directly on a barge or a boat. You can work on shore. It kind of depends on what it is you're doing. Does the product that you're touching, is it going straight onto a barge or a ship that's in a navigable waterway? That's a big part of it. It's a complicated legal issue about how you get jurisdiction for the act, but it involves, and most of this stuff is on navigable waterways. If I dug a big, huge creek or river from my house to someone else's house and had barges on it and people were working on it, it wouldn't necessarily be covered because it's not navigable. But if it is, or it's an inland lake, it wouldn't necessarily fall under the act. It has to be considered navigable under that act. But that's a specific legal issue, and that really doesn't come up very often, at least in Louisiana. Almost all the waterways that people could be injured on or working on are navigable. Mainly that, and there are certain classes of people like welders who are working on barges or ships who are automatically considered covered under the act. But for the rest of the folks, if you don't fall under one of those specific classifications, it's just a matter of what were you doing. I would say 90% of the time, there's no debate about it. They're not arguing about whether you were covered. It's not a huge problem normally. For some people who are very peripherally involved in working on land, really like in a warehouse that doesn't have anything directly to do with loading goods onto barges or ships, they might not be covered. But most people, if you're working for, let's say, a company, and there are a lot of them down here that have something in their name plus marine, you're probably going to be covered under the act. So that's an easy thing. And I tell people, if you don't know, contact us. That's what we do. Or contact some lawyer who you think this person can probably tell the difference.
One thing I think you had mentioned earlier was how, for instance, the Longshore Act, you file digitally, whereas for workers' comp in Louisiana, things are done by paper in person. What other differences might you call out between workers' comp and Longshore Act claims and how they are filed, how the disputes are resolved, and just generally how the case proceeds?
They're very different. From the attorney standpoint, they're very different. A lot of it the client doesn't see, but they'll see some of it. At first, in like a longshore case, there's an informal process where you can, I don't even want to call it a claim. You file a letter, talk about your claim, you upload it, and you get a claims person who kind of listens to the dispute. You don't go to court, and then the claims person usually is very favorable. They work for the Department of Labor as well. They're very favorable usually to your claim. They're generally going to find it in favor of you, but they're not judges. And then if the defendant, the employer, doesn't comply, then you have to file a formal claim through the C portal, and it'll be assigned to an administrative law judge who are very backed up on the claims, and they can take years, quite frankly. And that's not true in Louisiana. The workers' comp system is not that backed up. It doesn't take years. There is no informal claims process. You file a form, it's called 1008, in the comp court, and it's over your particular issue. The biggest difference between Longshore cases, Louisiana, and personal injury cases are what everybody's familiar with because they see thousands of commercials about it, which is those cases, somebody files a lawsuit and it goes to trial or gets settled before that, and it resolves the entire case. That is not true in longshore cases. That is not true in Louisiana workers' comp. You just have an issue. Like, let's say they won't let you choose the doctor you want to go to. Well, you file a claim. That's all the claim is about. In Louisiana, under the Longshore Act, it's about your choice of that doctor. It doesn't resolve your case. There is no mechanism to resolve your entire case in either Louisiana Workers' Comp or Longshore and Harbor Workers Act. You're just resolving little particular issues in your case. And the Longshore Act shares a similarity kind of with Louisiana in that you can't force them to settle. Now, when you reach MMI, they have to pay you a percentage of your, now that's the big debate. How disabled are you? What percentage of whole body or your arm are you disabled? You can have a huge fight over that because that essentially is the end of your case in the Longshore Act. In Louisiana, you don't have any arguments over that because it doesn't matter. And you can't force them to settle in Louisiana, and they can't force you to settle. So I guess how the cases end are the biggest difference between Louisiana workers' compensation and Longshore Act cases.
From the perspective of an injured worker, obviously they're going to come up against so many of these all the minutia of navigating a case. What are some of those common challenges that they face, and what recourse do they have to actually make sure that they get all the benefits they're entitled to?
I tell everybody this, and it's not a marketing ploy, and it's I'm dead serious about this. With a Louisiana workers' comp case, if you get involved in one and it's any kind of complicated, like if you have a paper cut, you probably don't need an attorney. But short of that, you need an attorney because both systems, the Louisiana workers' comp system and the Longshore system, are extremely complicated. And I always try to tell people the main thing you need to do is find an attorney that you trust. If it's not us, we think we're the best. But if you don't want us for some reason, you need to find someone to represent you because the other side, your employer, and likely their insurer, the insurance company who insures them for workers' comp claims or longshore claims, has tons of lawyers working for them and tons of claim reps who do understand this system. And if you've had no experience with it, you're going to get taken advantage of. In both systems, for the most part, they don't have to tell you about what rights you have under the system. You would think they do, because how would you know? But especially happens all the time in Louisiana, not as much in the longshore cases, but they just don't tell you. I'll give you a small example. You can get Louisiana, you can get it also under the Longshore Act, and the good insurers tell people, but they don't have to. Like, you can get reimbursed for your mileage to and from all medical visits, including physical therapy, anything connected with your case that's medical. They don't tell. We get people in here all the time. They've never been told. And there's no penalty for not telling somebody, so why should they tell you? That's huge amounts of money to which you're entitled in a lot of cases that people don't get because they don't know. And the only way to find it out is to get someone who's on your side, who knows it just as well as the other side, who's going to advocate for you and tell you, hey, this is what I think you should do for your case. Because ultimately, as an injured worker, especially your first time, whether it's a Louisiana workers' comp case or a longshore case, you need someone to advocate for you because it's impossible to explain, other than get an overview like this, it's impossible to explain this whole system to somebody. It takes years to understand it, tons of exposure to hundreds and hundreds of cases, which no individual is going to have, and they should be thankful for. Get someone to advocate for you, someone that you trust and you think is competent and is going to be able to help you. Because without that, you're not going to get the benefits to which you're entitled. Your case is not going to settle for the amount to which you're entitled or that it could settle for, because you just don't know. You have to look at it from the folks on the other side. Why would they pay you what they don't have to pay you? Why would they, if they can offer you $5,000 for a $100,000 case, that's what they're going to do. And if you don't know any better, you're probably going to take it. So tell everybody, at least talk to an attorney. It doesn't cost anything in either case, but especially in longshore cases. It doesn't even come out of your settlement. It's never going to cost you a dime to go talk to an attorney in a longshore case. Not at the beginning, the middle, or the end. Either we're going to recover from your employer or their insurer, or you don't pay anything.
Randy, thank you so much for sharing your experience, your expertise, because I certainly learned a lot, and I think many of our listeners did as well.
I enjoyed it. Thank you all for having me.
This has been Workplace Justice with Randy Estes. I'm Sam Henninger, and remember to like, share, and subscribe, because we will continue to have great conversations like this, and maybe one day we'll have both you and Dan on.
Excellent. Look forward to it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.